I'm Melissa Rosenberg, the Executive Director of the Autism Society of Maryland. Our organization serves Howard, Montgomery, and Anne Arundel counties and the surrounding areas. We provide information, support, social opportunities, education, and advocacy. If you aren't familiar with us, we have a wealth of information available on our website, through our resource coordinators, and many upcoming events listed on our calendar. Our next event will be an IEP boot camp on November 22nd. I'll be sharing that in the chat so that you can check that out if you're interested. Please feel free to connect with us for resources and support. Before we begin, we are offering tonight simultaneous interpretation for Spanish speakers. We'll remain together. Everybody who would want English would be on the English room, and then we have a Spanish language room. And I'd like to invite Magda to please provide some instruction on how to access the Spanish interpretation.
Gracias, Melissa. Thank you, Melissa.
Jessica, if you can mute, please. Thank you so much.
Okay. Buenas tardes a todos. Yo soy Magdalena Castro Lúez, cofundadora de Almas, una compañía para hacer servicios de traducción e interpretación. Bienvenidos al webinar titulado Absentismo Escolar. Las personas que desean escuchar la presentación en español lo pueden hacer yendo a la parte de abajo de la pantalla, hacer clic en el globo y escoger la opción español. O también puede ir a los 3 puntos y lo mismo escoger la opción español. Esos 3 puntos se encuentran también en la parte de abajo de la pantalla. También quiero recordarles a los participantes que mantengan sus micrófonos en silencio y las cámaras apagadas para evitar interferencias en la presentación y la grabación del seminario. Si tienen preguntas, pueden hacerlas en el chat del Zoom y al final serán también contestadas. La intérprete las puede también traducir para las personas que tengan preguntas en español. Ahora los dejo con Alicia Ardila Fortier, quien va a hacer la interpretación simultánea del seminario. Gracias.
Gracias, Magda. Thank you so much. Magda is joined by Alicia, who will be interpreting for us this evening. So I just want to thank and welcome our 2 presenters this evening. We have Dr. Jonathan Dalton. He's a licensed psychologist who is founder and director of the Center for Anxiety and Behavioral Change in Rockville, Maryland. He received his undergraduate degree in psychology from Villanova, a master's degree in psychology from the Catholic University of America, and a doctorate in clinical psychology from Fordham University with specialization in child and family psychology. He completed 2 years of pre-doctoral training at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Kennedy Krieger Institute.
You, mommy.
Jenna, can you mute, please? Okay. And advanced postdoctoral training at the Maryland Center for Anxiety Disorders at the University of Maryland. He specializes in treatment of anxiety disorders in children and teens with a focus on anxiety-based school refusal. He believes strongly in the importance of public outreach and frequently presents to student bodies, educators, mental health professionals, and community groups on the treatment of anxiety and related disorders. Also joining us this evening is Dr. Cynthia Schulmeyer. She's coordinator for psychological services with Howard County Public School System. She's served in that role for over 20 years, and the 12 years prior, she was a school-based school psychologist. Dr. Schulmeyer's areas of professional interest include supporting students with disabilities in the school setting, team-based decision-making, supervision, suicide prevention, crisis intervention, and threat management. She has presented at local and national professional conferences, taught at both the Towson University and University of Maryland Graduate School psychology training programs, and served on the boards of multiple professional organizations. Tonight's information is from shared experiences of the HCPSS school psychologists. And before we begin, I want to ask again, please, if you're not presenting, if you turn off your camera and remain on mute. Thank you so much and welcome Dr. Schulmeyer and Dr. Dalton.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be presenting with Dr. Schulmeyer. We agreed that I would go first, and I'll try not to run over on my time. I know that Dr. Schulmeyer has a lot of really important things to say. So briefly, I'm going to share some slides. I specialize in treating school avoidance in kids, and autism is something that's really central to our practice. I'm a father of an autistic kid as well, and so I kind of come at this from two angles, and it's really important to me personally as well as professionally as we go forward. So I'm going to share my slides. Hopefully, everyone can see them. Okay. So my goals for today are a few. I want to really talk about the distinction between anxiety and anxiety disorders, with obviously an emphasis on school avoidance and the role of avoidance in general in maintaining anxiety disorders among kids. But I really want to lean into, obviously, into the differences between anxiety-based school avoidance and what we call autism-based school avoidance. And it's something that's really central. I've been doing this work for 20 years, dealing with school avoidance in particular. We find in 2025 that among the kids who present to our center who are currently not attending school, about 50% are autistic and don't know it. And so we've really had to lean very strongly into developing an autism-specific intervention related to school avoidance because we simply see it all the time. I'm going to begin by talking just about how large of a problem school avoidance is. It is not a local problem. This is an article from Australia, and believe it or not, we get lots of calls for services from Australia. We really can't treat those kids for a lot of reasons, but a few years ago, the Australian Senate launched a federal inquiry into the rising rates of school refusal. This is a headline from the UK. It's obviously an issue over there. And it's actually a very big issue in Japan. This was actually, this article was written before the pandemic, just barely, but it was before the pandemic. And last year I had a company in Japan reach out to partner with me, and their sole purpose of this company in Japan is to help kids during a reentry process following school avoidance. So this is a very large and frankly growing challenge, and we're going to dig into it and hopefully give you some really good skills that we can begin using right away. I will say that I do a 16-hour version of this training, and so trying to boil a lot of this information down into less than half an hour is a challenge, but I'll do the very best that I can. Chronic absenteeism is defined as missing 10% or more of school days, which is 18 days out of 180-day school year, of course. And you can just track with me the level and seeing how it increased tremendously during the pandemic. Nationwide, from pre-pandemic to the first year of the pandemic, it increased by 93% across the country. We're slowly moving in the right direction, going from almost 31% down to a little bit under 27%, but it's still monstrously high. And in the state of Maryland, about a third, a little bit over a third actually, of all high school students are chronically absent from their school. School systems are very obviously aware of this, and I'm getting requests from many school systems for consultation and services because this is a very large problem. Moving into what the research is showing about the prevalence of school avoidance among our autistic kids. If you look at the research, depending on the different studies, we're looking at between 40 and 50% of kids who avoid school are autistic. That's right in line with the numbers that we are seeing. And that if you look at the bottom one by Norden, which is just a year old, you're seeing that the rates among autistic kids of school avoidance are just about 6 times higher than for our allistic kids in school. And so this is why I'm so excited to give this talk, because this is a huge part of what we are doing these days, is working with kids with all kinds of neurodiversity. So autism is by far the biggest one, but we really are seeing many kids who have autism plus. So ADHD, the ADHD plus autism, is a very classic presentation that we see among our school avoiders. And then a third part that we often see are difficulties with processing speed. And so this is kind of a classic presentation that we see where kids have a lot of different manifestations of differences in their neurological processing skills and abilities that really make the school avoidance more understandable when we can look under the hood, so to speak, and learn about what else is going on that's making school something that the kids feel are unsustainable in that way. I want to begin with talking about anxiety. And the way I was trained in this, decades ago, is that, if a kid is avoiding school, it means they're anxious. And many of my autistic kids, by the way, come in saying they're anxious. And when I ask them how they know they're anxious, they say, well, because I'm avoiding it. And I'll say, okay, well, there's lots of reasons. I avoid lima beans like the plague, but I'm not afraid of them. I just don't like them. And so it's really important that we just don't take the kids' kind of written or verbal report about why it's hard for them. Many of the kids don't know. They just know they can't go. So I'll begin with what I always begin with, which is an honest and accurate strength-based view of anxiety. And by the way, I'll go over this a little bit later, but 91% of highly verbal autistic people have 2 or more current anxiety disorders. And so this understanding anxiety, of course, is central to reducing the suffering of our autistic friends, family members, and colleagues. So here, I'm only half joking when I say that if you have someone who is smart, creative, and compassionate, the universe will go ahead and throw anxiety in for free. And I would also extend that to say, if you have a kid who's autistic, the universe will go ahead and throw anxiety in for free. And so rather than being a weakness or a flaw, in reality, this vulnerability for anxiety is a shadow cast by these virtues. And helping kids to kind of get the owner's manual for their brain and to be able to use non-avoidance skills to cope and self-regulate is really central. And I believe strongly that kids who have these kinds of anxiety and related disorders who go through evidence-based treatment are better off for having had the anxiety and going through the care for it rather than never having it at all, because they're going to learn really important things, like how to overrule fear as a decision-making tool and how to pursue their values rather than pursuing their comfort. So I just want to begin with the fact that the kids that we're talking about today, and this is the way I feel about autistic kids in general, is that they are extra alive. And so we want to help them to better understand how to navigate the world with the brain that they have. And by the way, I'll say this as an aside, I do not believe that autism is a disorder. I think of it as a neurotype. And I think there are autism-related disorders because it's really, really hard to be an autistic person in an allistic world. And so I'm hoping that in the next book of disorders that comes out, that autism will no longer by itself be a disorder, and there'll be autism-related challenges and difficulties that people face. Let me begin by talking about anxiety versus anxiety disorders. And so I'm going to begin with a metaphor that we'll refer back to in the next slide. So I want you to imagine that it's in the morning and you are running a few minutes behind schedule. You go downstairs, you put your toast or your bagels in the toaster, and you go upstairs to finish getting dressed. A few minutes goes by, and the smoke alarm in the kitchen goes off. You can never tell by the sound of the alarm if you burnt your toast or if the curtains are on fire. It's going to sound exactly the same. And we'll refer back to that in the next slide. So this is going to be an important foundation that we're going to build on, and then talk about the differences in our autistic folks and how we help them to deal with anxiety, because it is fundamentally different in the ways that I think are very important. So number one, anxiety is not a disorder. It can become disordered, but anxiety is a really appropriate, healthy survival skill. To me, anxiety is the flip side of pain. Pain says, stop doing this thing, you're damaging your body. Where anxiety says, don't do this thing, you may damage your body. Think of anxiety as nature's stop sign. If it's working the way it's supposed to, it's a dog that barks at a burglar, but not at the Amazon delivery guy. So it goes off when it's supposed to. It does not go off when it's not supposed to. The other part that is really foundational in our understanding of school avoidance is that anxiety stops us from repeating mistakes. So if while we are doing something, we get sick, hurt, or scared, it'll be red flagged in our memory, stored differently for easy accessibility, and we're never going to forget it. If you ever had food poisoning after eating something you previously enjoyed eating, you'll know the power of that conditioning experience. What makes anxiety become disordered is not the intensity of the anxiety. Even people in the field get this wrong. If you're in a dangerous situation, being anxious is the exact right way to feel because it's going to increase your sensory system. You're going to notice more things. You're going to not get distracted. You're going to lock in to the threat in your environment. What makes an anxiety become disordered is when it's fundamentally a false alarm. So the fear is real, but the danger is not. Now, this is where we go back to this. You can't tell if you burnt your toast or the curtains are on fire based on the sound of the alarm. You can never judge the accuracy of your appraisal of danger based on the intensity of your anxiety. And so what do we as humans do? Even if it's a false alarm, we fall back on what I call our default factory settings and we avoid and escape as a way to cope. Now, avoiding things that are dangerous or escaping from things that are dangerous is a really, really good idea. But if we avoid things that are scary but not dangerous, we are in essence firing the very best teacher we will ever have in our lifetime preemptively, which is our own experience that would have taught us that while the fear was real, the danger never was. And it leads to these really important words of unnecessary avoidance. And in there lies the target of treatment for classic anxiety disorders. Think of avoidance as the lifeblood of an anxiety disorder. It cannot persist in its absence. And so, if we can target and decrease the use of avoidance by arming kids with non-avoidant, effective coping skills, we are removing the oxygen from the fire. And even if we never touch the flames, they still are extinguished. Now, the key here, and this is where it gets a little bit different, is even among our school avoiders, it's not school they're avoiding. That's only the illusion. What they're actually avoiding are the emotions, the experiences they expect to have when they are there, or the experiences they have when they think about going there. And when it comes to our classic anxiety presentations, think of it like going to school is like crossing a bridge. And for our classic allistic anxiety disordered kids, they are terrified of what's on the other side of the bridge because they can't see across it. And they have lots of what ifs and uncertainties about what may lurk on the other side of the bridge. For our autistic kids, very often it's that I can't cross the bridge. I'm not afraid of what's on the other side. I simply can't get up on the bridge and cross it. I work with a young woman. She's autistic, brilliant, and she says that some days she can't go in, and she likened it to being at Safeway and having all the items on the conveyor belt, and the person tells you the total, and you reach for your credit card to pay for it, and you realize you've left your wallet or your purse at home. She says, I intended to pay for it. I want to pay for it. I just realized right now when I'm trying to, I can't. I don't have the ability to. So it's not motivation. It's not even fear. It's that I lack the ability. I can't cross that bridge. And so it's really important to understand that while anxiety is a huge part of school avoidance, it manifests differently. And I'll explain what I mean by that among our autistic students. And it's really, to me, it's a bifurcation. If it's an allistic anxiety disordered kid, we're going to take path A. If it's an autistic kid, we're going to take path B. And most of my autistic kids also have anxiety. And so we have to really what I call untangle the fishing line to figure out which parts of the avoidance are due to being overwhelmed and overstimulated or having cognitive overload or any of the things that we so commonly see among our autistic kids, and which of the fishing line threads go back to the what if questions, the uncertainty-based anxiety that we see. And I think of anxiety as really being founded on uncertainty. And I think of an anxiety disorder as an allergic reaction to uncertainty. And I'll talk in a few minutes about how I think that's different in critically important ways for our autistic kids. This is what I tell the kids is that avoidance and anxiety or avoidance and fear are teammates. If you pass the ball to avoidance, it's going to share it with anxiety because they're on the same team. One of them just doesn't look like they're a part of that team. They're wearing a disguise, but you want to understand that they are united against us. And so our goal in classic anxiety disorder interventions for school avoidance is that we decrease avoidance and the anxiety will die a natural death. And I'll talk in a minute why that is not really often that true for our autistic kids and how we change it for them. I mentioned the idea of avoiding emotions or experiential avoidance. So I want you to imagine for a minute that you are terrified of the wind. In this case, the wind are emotions. And so you think, all right, well, I know how to cope with that. I'm going to build a bunker. I'm going to get underground. I'm going to appoint it with comfortable things. And if the wind starts to blow, I'm going to scurry underground. I'm going to feel immediate relief because I'm out of the wind. There's a couple really important things wrong with that. Number one is that you won't get very far away from the bunker because you want to, basically be able to run underground if the wind starts to pick up. And number two, and more importantly, you'll never learn that you can in fact handle the wind. And so for our classic cases of anxiety-based school avoidance, we teach the kids to respond to your anxious thoughts, feelings, and sensations in the same way a palm tree responds to the wind. It doesn't fight against it because it has no need to. It knows it can outlast it. Okay. And this is a powerful intervention and highly effective for our classic allistic anxiety disordered school avoiders. We tell these kids that anxiety is a door disguised as a wall. And it's our job to show you where the handle is and how to open up the door so we can move through it. It's understandable why you think it's impenetrable. Our job is to show you how to navigate directly through it in that way. And so anxiety will fill whatever space we give it. And for a classic anxiety disordered school avoider, if we do a lot of accommodations for them, it's just creating a wider space for the anxiety to grow in. In fact, the research shows that lowering what's called family accommodation is highly, highly effective for anxiety disordered kids, but different for our autistic kids. And it's really important that you know both sides of this, because if you're seeing a clinician or a school-based team, they might not be well versed in understanding the differences, and they may apply this model, a classic school avoidant anxiety model, to a kid who has really important differences in the way they process information. Okay. I had a girl a few years ago. I saw her only briefly. I'm pretty sure she was autistic, but she missed 2 years of school. And I asked her our second session, I said, hey, I want you to fill in the blank in this sentence. I can be anxious and blank at the same time. And she thought about it and she said, I can be anxious and strong at the same time. And she was right. And she got back in the very next week and graduated on time. That is a true story. I asked a younger kid a similar question. He said, I can be scared and brave at the same time. If there was one thing that I could teach kids in one sentence, there it is. In fact, for my young kids I work with, I have them draw a picture of themselves being scared and brave at the same time and putting that in a place where they can see. It's called self-modeling, and I find it to be really helpful. But the best predictor is how effective someone believes they're going to be in handling the experience of the emotion. And so this is the metaphor that I often use. So let's say there's a bird on a branch, and this bird looks over and it sees there is a crack in the branch it's on. Well, is the bird unafraid because it can think of all the reasons why the branch is strong and unlikely to break? Or is the bird unafraid because it knows it can fly? Knowing you can fly is what we call self-efficacy. I want the kids to learn they're going to be okay, not because a hard thing won't happen, but because they can handle hard things. They're going to be okay, not because they won't be anxious, but because they themselves can handle the experience of anxiety. And this is the best predictor of long-term positive outcome, is an increase in this thing that we call self-efficacy, how effective you think you can be in coping with your environment. And when people are able to watch themselves do something that they didn't think they could do, this is what's the result of it, is they learn that they're way more competent in their coping than they had suspected. And I could go on for hours and hours about our classic anxious, avoidant school refusal kid. But I want to lean into autism because this is so important to me. And that's the reason why you're here. So of course, of course, our understanding has grown considerably. And autism does not mean what people think that it means. I educate teachers and other professionals. I say, in lifeguards, they teach them that drowning doesn't look like drowning. Whatever happened in your head about what drowning looks like, it's not that. What I tell teachers is that autism doesn't look like autism. Whatever you have in your mind, whether it's Rain Man or a kid you grew up with or something like that, it is so important to understand how big the tent has become and how important it is for us to understand the nuances and the really important distinctions of how we can help the kids who are in fact autistic. And like I said before, many of them, if not most, do not know they're autistic when I first meet them. And they've maybe seen other good professionals before. And now this is not me putting myself up there. I've missed way too many in my career, especially 10 years ago, of these kids. But so often when I get on a case, no one has even thought about autism as central to this. So when I do my professional trainings for other clinicians, I tell them my mnemonic is that if I'm meeting a new kid who's currently not in school, I assume they are autistic unless I get a lot of evidence that they're not. Because it's literally a coin flip, and it really helps me to tune into those frequencies that are so central in understanding this. So when psychologists were trained, when I was doing it a couple days ago, this is everyone's metaphor. So when it comes to reduction in anxiety, there's two really important core ingredients that reduce anxiety. One is habituation or getting used to it. The other one is violation of expectancy. The thing that you were afraid of doesn't happen, and you learn a different point of view on the fear and the anxiety that you were experiencing. So the classic metaphor of this is that, okay, you get in the cool water in the early part of the season, it's really cold, you get goosebumps, but you stay in long enough, which actually isn't that long, the goosebumps go away, even if you do nothing to change them. And neither you nor the water has changed temperature. It's simply you've habituated or gotten used to it. And so for years, that was the approach for school avoiders, is that, all right, you're going to go back in and we're going to stick the landing because it'll get easier every day that you're there because you're going to get used to it. You're going to habituate longer. But our autistic kids don't, because it's not so much anxiety that they're experiencing. Certainly that's a big part of it, but I think it comes from different places, and habituation is not nearly as effective. And let me explain what I mean by that. This is the metaphor I use when I train schools about school avoidance. Let's say that you're on a transatlantic flight and there's a newborn 2 rows ahead of you, and they are screaming their head off for hours. Maybe they have colic. Well, is it going to get easier the longer that baby is screaming? No. In fact, it's going to get a whole lot harder. And what is everyone on that plane going to do if they can't leave and neither can the baby and the baby keeps crying? Well, I'll tell you what they're all going to do is they're going to put on headphones and they are going to reduce their sensory inputs. They're going to, in other words, get accommodations for it as a way to deal with it. And so this is the main cleaving of the two approaches, is that when we deal with allistic school avoiders who are avoiding because of a classic anxiety disorder, we work to go on offense, to persist in the presence of the anxiety. We harness the power of habituation, and it is highly, highly effective. For our autistic kids, we lean into accommodations, the opposite. We try and make the world sustainable, not overwhelming, not overstimulating for them. And this is the reason why, okay? So let's say that I have a terrible phobia of the dentist and I hate going. And my tooth, though, it's really, really hurting. And so I try and put it off, but I can't. The pain is too bothersome. So I suck it up and I schedule an appointment for the dentist. And in the 3 or 4 days while I'm waiting to see them, I am so anxious. I'm having all kinds of intrusive what if thoughts. Like, what if I need a root canal? Or what if I need an extraction? Or what if there's something medically wrong with me? And having all of these scary thoughts, I'm going to have all kinds of urges to avoid. And it's going to be distracting. I'm going to have physiological activation, all of the classic anxiety signs. And it's based on the what if. What if something is really, really wrong? Well, then I go in, I'm sitting in the chair and they're doing x-rays. And the whole time my heart is thumping against my chest. And again, flooded with intrusive, scary thoughts. I'm telling myself scary stories. Then they come back and they say, all right, yep, you do have a small cavity in your bicuspid. Why don't you come back in next week and we'll take care of it for you. All right, well, the whole week in between, I am having a lot of thoughts about it, a lot of urges to avoid it, maybe having fantasies about postponing it, maybe thinking about what if I get a flat tire on the way. But it's not because I don't know what they're going to do. It's the opposite. I know exactly what they're going to do, and it's going to be miserable. They're going to put a needle in my gum, and they are going to put this awful tasting thing in there, and they're going to make this buzzing sound, and it's going to be uncomfortable. My jaw is going to get tired. No one likes getting a cavity filled. But anxiety is about uncertainty. And if you do the thing and it's not actually dangerous, which is the definition of an anxiety disorder, you are going to get a violation of expectancy. If you're thinking about dread, like I know exactly what they're going to do and I'm not looking forward to it, then when you go into the dentist, or in this case, into a school, it's not going to violate your expectancies. In fact, it's going to confirm them. You are overwhelmed. You are overstimulated. You are exhausted from masking all day. You can't initiate these open-ended assignments or questions because your brain is looking at the fractals of fractals and thinking of all the in-between ways that you can do it. And you can keep it up, but not for very long. I had a girl a few years ago, brilliant girl, older sister was at an Ivy. She's in 11th grade at that time. She'd been missing a lot of days since 6th grade. She's one of those that didn't know she was autistic, but she is, and she since learned that. And she also had ADHD and a processing speed challenge, which is our classic kind of triangle that we will see. And so it was a school up in Baltimore. I was attending it remotely, and the team there, the education team, I mean, I understand their point of view, they just happen to be wrong. They were saying, well, when you're here, you make really, really good, work. You have great work product. You ask insightful questions. We know that you're really smart. You get along with the kids. Like, you don't need accommodations. You just need to be here because when you're here, you do great. And this was a smart kid. And so what she said, I'll never forget it. She said, guys, you see me run the 100-meter and you think that means I can run the mile, and I can't. I can do it for short bursts. I can't keep it up for very long, because she was describing autistic burnout. It was taking so much effort to self-regulate, to mask, to do all of the things that we know these kids have to do. And she could not string those days together. She could not rinse and repeat, as we call it, in those situations. Okay. And so this is really, really important in understanding what it is that we're doing here. And thank you for the question. I'll get to that when we open it up for a Q&A. And that way, it's a really important question about the kids who are less verbal in those ways. Okay. And so this difference between dread and anxiety is central to understanding why we lean into accommodations for autistic kids, why we try and avoid them, or at least have them with expiration dates for our neurotypical or allistic anxiety-based school avoiders in those ways. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about this. Autism means so many different things, as that question kind of demonstrates. And again, we have limited time, so I'm going to go through it before I turn it over to Dr. Schulmeyer. But when we see autism-related school avoidance, we're looking for a goodness of fit. We're looking not, for the shoe that's the right size and doesn't give a kid blisters. We don't try and help them to get used to the blisters. Yes, they may turn into calluses for our anxious kids. They really don't. They turn into abscesses for for a lot anyway of our autistic students. We know that during school breaks are really important for these kids. So again, we're thinking about what can make school sustained for them. And so when we're doing these breaks, we don't just want to have an absence of demands. We want to be using sensory, regulation techniques, or just restorative, regenerative activities, whatever that might be. And each person is very idiosyncratic in that. Sensory soothing, of course. I'm sure that a lot of your students that you're here to learn more about have sensory boxes they can use to regulate in that way. Simplest things like reducing workload. So many of these kids, I call them shaken soda cans, because all day at school, they are under tremendous pressure. And if they put enough effort into it, they can contain it. Barely. And the poor parents, they can't tell if the can's been shaken or not until they try and open it. And these kids come back home and they explode everywhere, all over, the kitchen for these families. And there's no way they can then pivot and start to do homework. So reduced workload is really, really important. We also know that it's cross neurotype interactions that really lead to the degradation in energy the most. And so we know that just like African Americans who go to an HBCU have much lower rates of mental health disorders than people who go to kind of classic colleges and universities. I think a very similar process plays out, that having our autistic kids with other autistic classmates is really important because it means there's a whole lot less masking. Or one of my kids calls it interpretation exhaustion, where some of my friends say one thing, but they mean another, and I have to figure everything out like I'm a code breaker. Whereas my autistic friends, they'll just say what they mean, and I don't have to figure it out. Like they just tell me. Like, why doesn't everyone do that? And so really trying to scaffold relationships with other autistic kids is really important. We know that sleep is a challenge for many of our autistic kids, and so sleep regulation is central to sustain school attendance. Many of these kids become nocturnal. I call them grumpy vampires because it's really hard to fall asleep. And they end up creeping later and later and later. I'm working with a kid now who's going to bed at between 4 and 5 in the morning and is supposed to get up at 7:30 to go to school. Well, we obviously need to work on the sleep first. PDA is a loaded topic that I would love to dive into in a longer talk, but we do know that giving kids agency. And so, do you want A, B, or C? It's a multiple choice question. It's not an essay, but we want to give kids the experience of that. For my PDAers, one of my tricks for the school avoiders is that, look, you are central. You're the world's expert on your experience. And I don't want you to relinquish control by crossing over some invisible line for the school system where now they're going to be looking at alternative placement. I really want your voice to be heard, and leaning into that for our PDA. PDA is pathological demand avoidance, or maybe more warmly, persistent drive for autonomy. It comes out of the UK. Thank you for that question. Okay, I guess I'm trying to go through a fair amount here really quickly. But here's what I was talking about before. Look at Ong. Now it's 12 years old now, but this is what we see. I mean, anecdotally in our office every single day, half of not just our avoiders, but half of our clientele are autistic humans. And we love it. It's really important for us. And in this study, 91% of these kids, I don't like the term high functioning for obvious reasons. I would say lower support needs or highly verbal kids. We know that that's a much higher rate. What's really interesting is that's especially true for social anxiety, whereas the kids who have higher support needs have much lower levels of social anxiety because they don't pass. People understand that there are differences, and so they're not trying to live up to a false expectation, like a lot of our kids who maybe weren't even identified as being autistic until they were teens or older. I see plenty of people who were diagnosed when their kids were, which of course is classic. And I'm guessing the few of you can probably relate to that. What is really important is to understand why it's hard for these kids. And so I had a school avoider who asked me when he learned he was autistic, didn't know when he came in. And he said, why do I need like so much help on days with a change in schedule, when things like when there's a substitute or there's something going on? And so I told him and I think this is helpful in understanding the phenomenology, the lived experience of these kids. I said, I want you to imagine that you have the worst job in the world. You are working in a minefield every single day, and you have to pay attention to every step you take, because if you move 1 inch the wrong way, it's the end. The good news is you have a very detailed map, so you know where all they are. Now, it's exhausting because you got to watch every single step and be locked onto your map so that you know where they are. But you can do it. It's exhausting, but it's doable. Well, one day you come to work and they say, hey, there's been a change of plans. We're going to have you in a new minefield today. The only problem is we only have the map for the old one. Imagine what that's like. And that's the way a lot of these kids feel when there is something that is really, really new and novel, and they don't have a script for it in that way. Now, let me go off my slides for a minute. I mentioned this earlier, but the thing that I see the most with our school avoiders is ADHD, that overlap between between ADHD and autism, obviously. And these kids tell me some version of this sentence. I can't get myself to do something I don't want to do, even if I know I have to do it. And it's not so much a classic motivation. They know that life would go a lot better if they did this thing. They try to do this thing. They just can't. Yes, yes, ADHD, which is a combination of autism and ADHD. And so with those kids, we see this where, again, they can't cross the bridge, not because they're not afraid of the other side of it. These are kids who can't start. They can't initiate something unless it's intrinsically interesting and relevant to them. And I liken these kids to like a Ferrari with a faulty starter that with support at the point of performance, with high external structure, they can get a jump start and they can get their roaring engine to move forward. But trying to just turn the key doesn't work because the starter's not working. And so these are the kids who I was consulting on one of these cases this week where a kid will set a positive message in the morning on their alarm clock. They will have every intention of going to school the next morning. They want to go to school. They might even be looking forward to being at school in certain situations. But the transition from a comfortable, warm bed to getting up is the hardest transition of the day. And we know that transitioning from a highly rewarding to a less rewarding activity for autistic folks can be physically painful for them. And so we know that support at the point of performance, external structure is really important. Let me tell you what one of my ADHDers told me this week. He said, yeah, I hear you, Melanie. I consult with so many schools. I train hundreds of school professionals because of your question, because that is the question. We need to help them with that. So this kid said to me that my routine is like the current in a river. And if I don't have any energy to like paddle in my little rowboat, I'm going to go where the current takes me. Now, if my routine is going to school every day, then that's where the current takes me and I can kind of relax and it's going to take me there. For kids who are not in school, well, guess where the current takes them? Not in school. And so he said, like, some days I can like really row against the current and I can even like make it to a different place than the current takes me. But it takes everything I have, then I don't have any left over to do anything else during the day. And so for him and a lot of our ADHDers, the routine, the development of a healthy routine that we build over time is the target of intervention because that we're getting the current to move in the right direction. That and relational safety. So people have to either want to do the things because it's inherently interesting to them, or they have to like the person who's asking them to do it. And so this is another part that schools, it's really important for them, is to build relational safety for these kids, to talk with them about their special interests, those kinds of things, and not about the other, demand activities that we're asking of them in those situations. Thank you, Brianna. Again, I could talk for so long about all of these things. But I do want to turn it over to Dr. Schulmeyer because I will filibuster and I will use all the oxygen in the room because I love talking about this so much. But I do want to give it over to her and then we'll open it up for questions and I can go through more stuff as we go along. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Dalton. I will also share my screen, so provide me just a moment to get that set up. So thank you for joining us this evening, and certainly thank you to the Autism Society of Maryland for this evening's invitation. As Dr. Dalton mentioned, this is a very important topic, and we are trying to provide you with some information, but we know there's also a lot more that we could provide as well. So we're trying to keep it to what we see as what we hope will be most helpful for you as you are navigating situations such as this. I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing with you that my presentation is going to be providing information in a lot of generalities, meaning that I've not designed this presentation for your child specifically. And what I'm trying to say there is obviously each child is unique. Each child has their own ways in which they're demonstrating their anxiety. Each child is demonstrating their own ways and preferences when it comes to school. So we certainly know that. So I'm just going to be providing some overall information. But hopefully some of what I'll be providing you will empower you to work with the school. And that's really what we're seeking. Okay, it doesn't want to slow. There we go. So the first thing I wanted to share was you've seen both of these words. You have certainly are familiar with most likely the difference between school avoidance and school refusal. But basically school avoidance is typically considered the broader term. And we find that typically the student wants to attend, but for many of the reasons that Dr. Dalton was just describing, they may not be able to. School refusal tends to be a little different. School refusal is that, you know, the child, oh, pardon me. The child is able to go to school, but doesn't want to go to school. And this is a different type of student. This is a different type of way in which we're going to respond. But I'm going to be honest with you, after living in schools for probably almost 40 years as a professional, between a special ed teacher, school psychologist in schools, and now in my current position, I will tell you that schools confuse these two terms. So just know that going in, and so that might be something you might have to untangle as you are working with your school teams. Also wanted to help you see the differences between school avoidance and truancy. And the reason I bring this up is that sometimes families who are managing school avoidance challenges in their household are worried that they're going to be considered truant. And that's not the case. While yes, there is a law regarding truancy, there is a law about coming to school and not coming to school, which could certainly potentially result in legal action. I will let you know that if we know that the family and the school and whomever else is supporting the student are working together to address the issue, that in and of itself is very important. And the student would not be considered a student who is truant. Now, you probably figured out just from my couple slides and some of my comments that you know, this work is not done alone. We don't see parents needing to do it alone, schools needing to do it alone, but actually we all need to be a team and working together to address what it is that is facing us in the school avoidance issues for your son or daughter. Pardon me. If your child has an IEP or a 504, you will also want to be sure that the case manager is included in this team, as well as potentially any other IEP 504 team members. So again, and you'll notice that I've included on this team a community provider. So if you are already working with a community provider, we want them to be a part of the team in working on school avoidance in that is occurring. If you're not already working with a community provider, but maybe you add a community provider at a later date, of course, we also want to welcome them to be a part of the work because all of us want to work together. Now, from a school system perspective, Doug, we can hear your background noise. If you could just mute, that would be great. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
From a school system perspective, we are going to want to take a problem-solving approach to looking at what it is that is contributing to the school avoidance. What I've outlined here is actually the steps that are typically looked at through a problem-solving model. And when we're doing this work, we're doing it together, just like I said in the previous slide. I'm not going to read all 8 steps that are listed there, but instead we're going to take a few slides to kind of look at some of the highlights for each of the steps. So we'll start with actually just some early warning signs. Some of you might be thinking, I wonder, if these are indicators of school avoidance, and potentially they might be. So obviously we want to be paying attention to them, but we notice that the child is exhibiting a pattern of anxiety or withdrawal from unfamiliar people, unfamiliar environments. Some things that demonstrate that sometimes is the child might be using a lower voice volume. They might be avoiding social situations. In the classroom, they maybe were previously quite participatory, but now they're less participatory. We talked a little bit about substitute teachers just a few moments ago, but again, here, not feeling that they are able to engage when there's a substitute teacher present, maybe taking a long time responding, clinging to a parent at drop-off, and really there are many more. So you want to be on the lookout for subtle ways that your child might use avoidance as a coping mechanism. Now, from a school's perspective, if we're starting to notice some of those signs, we're going to look to increase those connections with the students, because that's our first like red flag. Gosh, something's going on here. Let's try and get a better understanding. Let's make sure that the student has a trusted adult that they can connect with in the school. Let's make sure the student is having a trusting relationship with their teacher, perhaps their school counselor, or maybe there's another identified adult in the building that would be a good person to have a trusting relationship with. Here's a very small list of some possible roots or core causes of the school avoidance. And sometimes, things happen that are totally out of our control, but they might, be what the child says, that, and what they reflect back on, that this is kind of when things started. Illness or death of a family member or a pet is not something you have control over, but it does happen. And so we do need to work with those. Change of class or school. Sometimes families need to relocate due to employment opportunities. And again, those are things that might have an impact on a child. And you see a number of other potential lists here. The list can go on, but it just sort of gives you an example of how some things could potentially be impacted. Now, one of the initial steps in the problem-solving model is to do an assessment. You really want to try and identify what the situation is. And so there's many factors that can contribute to school avoidance. So as part of an assessment, I'm going to want to look at some of these. Dr. Dalton already mentioned a few of them. He mentioned processing speed for an individual, that might be a contributor to some of their school avoidance. Academic difficulties we know could potentially be there. Other social situations could be problematic. And really what we're going for is we're trying to determine what the student is avoiding. Avoidance, as we've mentioned earlier, is, certainly a component of anxiety. But, what we're trying to do is to, look for the constellation of the fear and the avoidance, and really hopefully get to a place where we can identify what the core fear is. Sometimes this takes more than one go around, to be honest, to really feel like you have an understanding as a team as to what the core fear is. Some ways in which the adults who are involved in this process might secure some answers from a child, or secure at least what their perception is, are some of the questions that you see on the screen. You know, if you could change one thing about school that would make it easier for you to come back, what would it be? Maybe, you know, a question you might think about is, I'm afraid, you know, ask them to finish the sentence. I'm afraid people will think of me as, and, you know, have them complete the sentence. You know, what is it you wish people knew about you that they don't know? We might need to spend some time really making sure that, you know, the emotion that they're feeling matches the words that they're using. Dr. Dalton mentioned a situation that he had where that, you know, the student was saying something, but it wasn't really matching what the actual emotion was. And so we need to dig a little bit deeper to get an understanding of that. And then together as a team is that you want to see if you can get a better understanding, spend some time looking at the data that has been collected together, and see if, you know, there might already be an identified concern. You know, fears and phobias might be well known for this particular individual. You know, physical condition, you know, what we know about the neurodiversity might all be things that might be known. But we're also looking to see if we can describe the possible function of this behavior. Is it, you know, the person's trying to avoid a pain, or their, you know, their fear of abandonment, or other things, you know, the way in which they process emotional stimuli or situations is putting them in a spot where it's different than how others are, or, you know, the fear of being thought of in a certain way. You know, the kids are going to think I'm ugly, the kids are going to think I'm stupid, they're going to think that I'm weird, you know, or things like that. I put this slide in here, and this is just an opportunity to take a pause and summarize what some of Dr. Dalton shared before we get into interventions, to help to remind us what it is that how we need to approach this. So if it's an anxiety-based type of situation, and we don't really have time tonight to get into exposure, but the treatment is exposure, and we're not going to be looking to accommodate. Whereas if it's an autism spectrum disorder based, the treatment is accommodations, and exposure therapy will have the opposite effect that you want it to have in these situations. So again, I mentioned when I started talking that, you know, I'm viewing what I'm sharing with you in generality. So here is just some list, and you'll notice sometimes think like on the next slide, I use the word, you know, these are possibilities, right? But we do, you know, you do want to aim for a rapid reentry, as much and as quickly as your child can tolerate. But at the same token, it's also important for you to know that gradual reentry is common, you know, 1 or 2 periods at a time, and then continuing to add to that. And be thoughtful about those 1 or 2 periods, and work with the team on that. But there's a lot of planning involved as we move forward. There's, you know, logistics that we need to plan for. While it may not seem important to you, it's probably very important to your child to find out where they're going to sit in each class. Who will meet and greet your child upon arrival and escort them to the classrooms, if that's the strategy we're going to use it. What's our strategy? What's our plan for makeup work and missed quizzes and tests? Lunch can be, you know, very challenging, and so let's plan for that ahead of time. Who are they going to be sitting with? Let's also plan for the barriers, though, you know. So is transportation a barrier? All right, then we need to work together to figure out how we can address transportation. Maybe the student will come to the school if you drop them off, but won't come to the school on the bus. But that's not going to work because you know, you need to be on your way to work, for instance, and so the timing doesn't work out. So what can we do about transportation? What can we do about lunch? Maybe a different location for lunch is an option that we need to plan for, perhaps in an alternative setting or a smaller room. Let's plan for if we're noticing a lot of requests for bathroom breaks or reasons to go to the nurse because they're not feeling well. So, you know, just things like that. We want to make sure we're planning for the logistics that we know of, as well as any barriers that we know of. It's also an opportunity when you're together as a team to start brainstorming what are some possible accommodations that might work for your child. And here's a list of just some possibilities. Things like, reducing expectations, whether that's the work being done during the classroom time, homework amount that needs to be completed, reducing the tests and quizzes. Maybe the child says they don't want to be called on, so gradually introducing that concept in a classroom. Make sure that if a student is using a flash class, they know how to use it, and they know where to go, they know how to ask for request. Sometimes the ask for request is not a verbal ask, but it might be some type of gesture or symbol that the teacher and the student have back and forth, and the teacher then knows that the student is going to take advantage of their, and I see, just noticed that I called it a flash pass instead of a flash pass on the screen, but I think you know what I'm referring to. Some possible, school-based strategies that we could put in place. This first one works better when we're preparing. So when we're preparing for a school year to start, or preparing for return from breaks, which we know can be challenging. Getting to know the teacher and prior staff. Maybe the student and the team figure out a script that they can answer when people ask them why they've not been in school. Maybe some students, it might be helpful for them to engage in a preferred activity upon arrival, such as running an errand for the teacher or something like that. Perhaps this is a student that we need to think about. How can we help them learn some other strategies, such as self-talk and coping strategies? Look at social opportunities, perhaps, for a student that we can help them be. So again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is to get you started on that brainstorming as you are working together with the team who is working on your student, with your student. Couple things from a parent perspective. On the next slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit about a training program that can help you, as well as a resource to help you learn about the role of anxiety in avoidance. But you also want to establish rules at home for the absence. Like, what are the reasons that a child stays home, such as a fever, recovery after wisdom teeth removal, or just other things, that in your household, what are the rules for absence? I should have put this next one in red, because this is really, really, really important. We want to make sure that when the child is home during school hours, it's not fun, right? So this is a time when there's no screens. They're not getting to read their favorite books with a parent. They're not working on projects. They're not playing at their grandparents' house, whatever it may be. We don't want that time to become the time that's more fun than the time being at school. And if they are starting to feel better, perhaps there's an opportunity to take a look at Canvas and see what work is available for them to start working on when they're missing it. So just a small pause here to let you know about a resource that is available. It's referred to as Supporting Parenting for Anxious Children Emotions. And this is a resource written by Dr. Leibowitz. Dr. Leibowitz has done a good amount of research in looking at ways to use parent education to help empower parents to change the behavior in ways that will reduce their child's education. And I'm giving you two things here. One, I'm letting you know Howard County Public School System does offer, it's called SPACE for short, SPACE groups. And that is a live link to the information on the website. The fall sessions have already started, but I know there's going to be some winter and spring sessions as well. So if that's something you're interested in, you can take a look at. This is an opportunity to get together with other parents of anxious children. It's a forum for you to connect. It's a forum for you to share experiences, as well as learn strategies about how to better support your children. If you are looking for something a little sooner than that, pardon me, I give you the link to the book. I give you the Amazon link. I found the book to be very helpful. It offered a lot of practical strategies for you as a parent that might work for you in your household. So just a resource for you to have access to. So just a couple more thoughts to share. We also, I've talked about it being a team. So every member of the team is going to be doing something, right? So here's an example of some things that your child might be doing. They might be practicing their strategies with you at home or with school staff. So if they're learning self-talk or they're learning coping strategies, or maybe they're engaging in some role play activities. And here's a couple of examples here of things that they can do to role play about how to practice the strategies that they've been taught for school avoidance. And then certainly if you have a community provider that you're working with, we would ask that you provide a release of records to allow the community provider and the school staff to collaborate, communicate, share together. It would be great if the community provider can attend some of the planning meetings, share strategies that they're using with the school team. We don't want to confuse the child. The example I always use for this is, let's say I'm using a thermometer to measure how angry you are, and I give you a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. And at school, I'm using a 1 to 10 scale, but the therapist is using a 1 to 5 scale. So if the student says I'm a 5 today, in my world, I'm thinking they're in the middle, but in the therapist world, they're thinking at the very top of the thermometer. Obviously, those are two different things. So something as simple as knowing what scale you're using so that we're all on the same page is why it's important to communicate with the providers. If the provider is able to join follow-up meetings, that would be great. If, attending meetings isn't possible, maybe there's other ways to collaborate, such as through emails or brief phone calls or brief virtual calls to collaborate so that they can be a part of the team as you're working together to address the school avoidance that your child is showing. I think Dr. Dalton and myself would agree that we know this is hard work. And it takes perseverance from all of us. It's so much better to work as a team than to work in silos on this work. It's good to have frequent check-ins to review progress. And we know there'll be setbacks, right? We know life happens and there are setbacks. And so we need to pick up and keep going. We need to lean on each other when needed. And most importantly, we need to celebrate small successes when they do occur. So that brings you to the end of my formal presentation, but I know there's been some questions in the chat. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can see how many of the questions we can get to.
That's great. Thank you. So I'm going to kind of scroll back around here and see which ones we didn't get to. And we did have some that were submitted. So thank you, Dr. Dalton and Dr. Schulmeyer. Great presentation. Lots of great comments. All right, let's see. Looking for questions here. What about children on the spectrum who might feel anxiety but are nonverbal or maybe very low verbal skills? How do you handle such a child who might be feeling anxiety?
I can grab that one if you want. So for our non-speaking autistic students, avoidance is the purest measure of distress. And so what I want to look for is just to observe, let's say there's someone with an intellectual disability who can't really articulate what's going on. I've certainly worked with a lot of those individuals over time as well. I look for what I call the constellation of avoided situations. And I want to think of those as branches and leaves on a tree. And my job is to look at the trunk that ties them all together. Why are these situations avoided consistently and these aren't? Or under which conditions is this harder than that one? And what we basically look for is to work backwards and say, okay, what must be true in terms of the kind of difficulty they're having based on the unique pattern of avoidance that we are seeing. And then we basically work to backwards from there to help them to be more tolerant by changing the environment that we are operating in that space. There are other things too. There's for people that might have intellectual disabilities, what's called behavioral relaxation therapy, or BRT. I've certainly done that before. My very first exposure case, and I specialize in exposure, I was working at Kennedy Krieger with a young adult who was a non-speaking autistic woman, and she would flee and she had an ID as well, and she would flee the bus that was taking her to her day program. And so we basically did is that we modeled certain poses that are in in line with a relaxed physiological state. And then we did some reinforcement for those things and lowered expressed emotion, all of those things. By the way, these kids, these school avoiders like this, I think of them like filled sinks. And they're full of all of their own internal bubbling emotion and distress. And one of the things that's so important is that parents don't pour their glass of emotion into the sink, because all it's going to do is overflow. And so lowering expressed emotion is critically important. Calm is contagious. We want to model what we are trying to elicit from the individual in those ways. As a dad, that's a really hard thing to do. As a doctor, I know it's the right thing to do. So know that this is the hardest thing for parents, because you're always on. And it's something that is really important. And speaking of the sink, by the way, there are some right now kinds of approaches too when kids are flooded. So using the sink metaphor and extending that a little bit further, there's a reason why every sink has a top drain. It's not the main one that we use, but if we're about to overflow, we're glad that we have it. And so this is the way that I've discovered and been taught by my autistic clients, that think of someone who's being flooded and overwhelmed. Think of it like the back picture on a lifeguard chair of what to do if you are caught in a riptide. And so if you come back to shore, if you're like, oh my God, I'm being pulled out to sea, and you try and swim against the current and just try and go right back in, all you're going to do is exhaust yourself and you won't make any progress. Because thankfully, the riptide, while it is a really intense band of energy, it is also narrow. And so what I do and what I recommend schools do for kids who are feeling overwhelmed, and I don't like the term meltdown, I think it's pejorative, but I think it's a really important concept, that if you tell them, all right, what skills can you use right now? I want you to calm down. I want you to breathe. And you try and do that. You're trying to have them swim back to shore against the current. What I do when I'm working with one of these kids, which is every day, I know their special interests. I know if it's otters or if it's seals. Those are two examples of people I'm working with right now. And I will have preloaded videos where I'll do some research before a session. And if I see their launch sequence getting initiated, that they're getting flooded, the first thing I do is I get up and I dim the lights in my room. I don't use their fluorescent overhead lights. I use a bunch of floor lamps so I can dim them. So I lower stimulation. And then I say something like, oh my goodness, I saw this really cool thing. There's there's a zoo not too far away that has this really cool otter exhibit, and they have little holes in the plexiglass, and they can stick their little paws through it and you can pet them. Let me show you a video. And so I pull them out of the stream of the riptide through distraction and redirection. Once they get out of the intense band, and special interest are one of the best ways to do that, then it's more about like, hey, did you notice what happened there? This is amazing. Look what you've just done. Now, okay, it's not too hard. You can come back here now. And so I never address the actual issue. I use redirection to special interest or to things that they're really, excited about coming up in their life in some way. And I pull their attention off of it. And then bring them back. And so many of the kids avoid school because there's no one at school who can help them to regulate should this thing happen to them. And so training the school staff on the riptide and what's going to work for this kid. What is the lure that can pull them out of the riptide? What are their special interests? What are their hobbies? What are their passions? And then knowing that and having that preloaded almost so that we can help them and co-regulate with them is really, really important.
Thank you. That's great. We have a question here. What are the formal assessments to ask? Or is this what a BIP or a FBA would address?
I'll go ahead and take that one. Thank you for the question. Good question. I'm going to answer that it may or may not be what a functional behavioral assessment is going to be looking at. when I'm talking about assessment here, I'm talking about more informal assessments. I'm not talking about standardized assessments that would happen as far as part of an eligibility process. Really, what I'm talking about is questions that would help us get a better understanding of potentially the function that the avoidance is sharing, is one possibility. Questions to help us get a better understanding, just looking at the special interests that Dr. Dalton was just talking about, if we don't already have that knowledge about the student, so that we do learn that, so we too can look at some of the ways to redirect and distract a student as we're trying to help them enter and return into school. So it doesn't necessarily have to be anything formal, but it can be things that the team comes up with together.
Thank you. There's a bit of a conversation about rules when a child doesn't want to go to school, that perhaps then they can't do their preferred activity. How comfortable do you make home? You know, this kind of thing, or what do you do on the preferred activities if they're not allowed to do that for parents who work? What are your thoughts on that kind of a situation?
I can jump on that one. It's a really hard question to answer because it's so individualized, but the answer is really important. It's just not easily generalizable for every single kid. Let me give you examples of ways that I approach that. So for a lot of the kids, I saw comments in the chat, we want home to always be a safe place. And yet I see a lot of kids that camp out at the intersection of comfort and misery. And so we know, for instance, that growth and comfort are often incompatible experiences. And we're trying to establish a routine that moves towards, health and functionality for them. And so sometimes boredom can be a really great ally. And so, that's really important. I think that for a lot of people, what I do is that I basically say, okay, during school hours, and we know autistic people, one of the great strengths is they understand justice and the importance of fairness. And so I lean into that and I say, it's not really fair for the kids who are in school if you can do the things they can't do during school hours. And so my autistic kids like overwhelmingly go, yeah, that makes sense. And so what we do is that we say you can do these activities that are more like, yes, you can of course always stim. I saw that was in there. You can pet your cats. I have people where I have plenty of people actually where cats on their lap, especially if they're purring, is like a turbocharged regenerative experience for them. If they are in burnout mode, we're going to be doing regenerative activities. And I mentioned this in the chat too. I have a treasured colleague out in Oregon, Dr. Megan Anna Neff, who's a psychologist who learned she was ADHD when her kids were diagnosed. And her special interest is disseminating information about autism. And so her website is a great resource for burnout recovery and prevention. And so many of the kids that I work with who are autistic are misdiagnosed as having depression when really they have burnout in that way. And so if it's a burnout related situation, we're going to be leaning into building up the reservoir of resilience when they're in that environment. But one of my tricks is that it's not really a trick, but you can get access to all of your preferred activities at the time you would be returning home from school if during that day you do school. And school can be a changing term. It might be that you open a book. I had one of my ADHDers last week who hasn't opened her bio book this semester. And she really wanted to bring her dog into my school avoidance group. And it's like, all right, you can bring him in. Just make sure you read 20 pages of your bio book. And guess what she did? There's a different ADHD bringing his dog in tomorrow for the same group. And so what we do is that we define like school, might be doing like 20 pages, might be opening the book. It may be going to the parking lot. It may be slapping the front door and going back. It may be going in and giving the counselor a fist bump and then leaving. And so we're trying to establish the routine, it's called a shaping protocol, to be getting closer to what looks like a sustained attendance. And of course, for these kinds of kids, making sure the school is the right fit for them. We don't want to have a designer shoe that looks great on paper. We want the one that's well worn, that fits nicely, and you can walk a long way in it because the school year is a long walk.
Thank you. Another question for Dr. Dalton. Many special ed schools, including my son's, incorporate ABA-based strategies. The focus on compliance, consequences, rewards just does not work for my likely PDA child. The other supports are excellent, so it's a good fit overall, but how can I communicate with the school to convince them that those strategies will exacerbate the anxiety?
It's a really good question. I used to work at Kennedy Krieger. And so I was trained, 20 years ago in ABA, and I've seen it change lives. I've seen people come in who were engaging in horrible self-injury as a stim, and we were able to change it and to help them to live a much less suffering in their lives in that way. And yet you're right. And for the PDAers, it's about relational safety. Like I have a kid that I work with, and he was refusing school. He had been in residential. Parents coming in to see me. He was refusing to come in and see me, which is like a Tuesday for me. That's pretty typical. And I'm thinking, what do I do with this guy? Because we can't send him to residential. Like he did that. And by the way, those kids can do great when they're in that high structure, but they have a really hard time transporting gains back into home. That's what I find anyway. And so I'm thinking, well, how do I help this kid if he's not going to come in and I really can't refer to a higher level of care and he's not going to school? I have an idea. Let me hang out with him. And so I went to his house and he met me at the front door. He was like a sophomore and he's like, hey, do you want to learn how to shoot arrows? I'm like, yes, I do. So we went in the backyard and I got an arrow stuck in their fence. That's a true story. I went back 4 times. We played ping pong. We played a retro game of Mario Kart. Actually won that one. The modern ones he kicked my butt in. And it was 4 hours when I was at his house over the course of 4 weeks. And then we were playing ping pong the 4th week. And he said, so you ever going to mention school? I was like, funny you mentioned that. That kid's been in every week for the last year and a half. He's been in school full time. And it's all about relational safety. It's about investing, putting money in the account before you write a check on it. And so for the PDAers, it is relational safety is the thing that I find to be absolutely critical in that way. Again, we are all learning about PDA. I don't know of anyone who considers themselves like a really good expert. It's kind of like, people who in physics who are like, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't. And for PDAers, anyone who really knows PDA says I have a lot to learn because we're all still learning about it in those ways.
Thank you. We've had a couple questions about working with the school system, getting educators to kind of understand the family and child perspective, but then also there's some questions that were submitted from some educators trying to deal with kiddos who are just, suffering from anxiety, not wanting to do different things or even be in school. So maybe Dr. Schulmeyer, can you give us a little guidance about how, the two can work together and what's the best way to do that?
Sure. And again, I know each person who is contributing to the chat is at a different starting place. And so I'll offer a couple ideas. If you're at the very beginning and you've not really had much communication with the school about your child's avoidance, I would start with the school counselor. That would be the first place to start. If you do have a IEP, then, as parents, you have the right to call an interim meeting at any time to have this conversation and to discuss perhaps some strategies that you're learning about, strategies that thing that you are learning are potentially effective for your son or daughter. So that would be some ways. I agree with some of the things that are popping up in the chat now about sharing resources. So whether it's sharing resources such as, what you learned this evening, resources such as things that you might find on Dr. Dalton's website, resources such as you might learn from other trainings that you attend. I think that is another way to help schools. Like Dr. Dalton mentioned before, while there's certainly some things that we feel like we have a good handle on, there's still a lot we're still learning. So we like to learn just like you do. And so those would be some ways in which I would consider approaching the individuals. If that doesn't work, then I would think about the team that you're working on. You think about who is your best, collaborator that you've had experiences with in the school? You know, is it the IEP case manager, or is it, you know, the school administrator, you know, whomever it is, maybe partnering with them to try and discuss more details about what it is that you're looking for.
Thank you. And a question about, are psychologists actually diagnosing PDA in the US yet?
So it's not actually a diagnosable condition. You can't put it on an insurance form, you know, in that way. But yeah, and I have a treasured colleague in the area at Stickford and Associates, Dr. Donna Henderson. I'm sure a lot of you know her name. She has some really great webinars and resources on PDA, which is wonderful as well. You know, I do, one of the things I do want to say is that I have a lot, like I was giving a talk at Mansfield Hall. I don't know if you guys know that one. It's a college for autistic people. And I was talking about PDA, and a lot of the parents were, oh, that means it's my kid, because my kid doesn't like doing these things either. It's you know, it's really hard for parents to always get it right, because it always looks like PDA when the kid is in that situation. And so just as a word of caution, that it's, especially among school avoiders, PDA is very well represented. And I often see parents, and I'm in that list, who look at their own children and say, oh, they must have PDA. And so as we're learning more about it, I think it's important to go into it with humility, and, you know, and not assuming that because my kid is having these challenges, it means they fit the PDA profile as well.
Right, we have time for one more question, and we did get a couple online that are along the same lines, but what are your feelings about the option of virtual learning for a kid who is reluctant to go to school?
I have very firm beliefs about that. I don't like it, because school avoidance has way more to do with avoidance than it has with school. And if we look at the kids and the research longitudinal studies about what happens to those kids later in life, it's not because they forgot when the War of 1812 was that they have a different future. It's because they use avoidance as a means of self-regulation, as their primary go-to strategy. We want to arm them with non-avoidant coping skills. That doesn't mean that online doesn't play a role in that. It can be a bridge. But my ideal situation is to get somebody into the right environment full of people who understand them, can scaffold their challenges and celebrate their strengths, and let them just watch themselves be successful in those ways. To me, that's the sweet spot that we're looking for.
Dr. Schulmeyer, any thoughts on the same topic?
I certainly second what Dr. Dalton has shared. You know, virtual learning is, you know, certainly offers some what seems to be some, you know, things that would be very helpful. But we also have to remember that we're educating our child for more than just, you know, the War of 1812, for instance. You know, we're educating our children and our students to be ready for whatever is next after high school for them. And so, and virtual learning does not offer all of those opportunities.
Thank you. That's great. I'm gonna share the Stixred group website that Dr. Dalton mentioned, so that you all have that, and that's Dr. Donna Henderson.
Yeah, and she's wonderful for PDA. I will say that many, and I'm sure everyone here understands this, that the waiting list for testing sites, you know, for an autism identification can be really, really long. We've begun doing it because we could not wait for people to get the accommodations that they deserve in schools in that way. You know, I also second what Dr. Schulmeyer was saying about a team. Like, that's what we've found, is that we don't do a group practice, we do a team practice, because, you know, it's often one clinician is doing the individual child focused work, one is doing parent training, one is doing the group. We do groups for school avoiders, and half of our kids are autistic. And by the way, that's the secret sauce. What these kids so desperately need is connectedness. And what's the opposite of connectedness? It's school avoidance. And so really scaffolding ways, whether it's DC peers or whether it's a therapeutic group for school avoiders who are autistic, that level of when kids say same, oh yeah, me too. That is the core that we're looking for, that sense of authentic connectedness and being understood, being on the inside and getting it, and having other people get them in return is irreplaceable in terms of helping the kids to learn that they can do other things more than they thought they could do.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up right now with our sincere thanks to Dr. Dalton and Dr. Schulmeyer. It's been a great conversation. I can tell because nobody was rolling off. You guys stayed with us all evening. Thank you so much. What a great conversation. Our next event is an IEP boot camp here at our office in Columbia on November 22nd. It's 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. with our special education consultant, Beth Benavides, and attorney Nicole Joseph. It's going to be a great session. Please check out our website. We have moms nights out, dads nights out, support groups in Spanish and English every month, all kinds of great social things, advocacy work, and we're here to help you as much as we possibly can. So thank you again, and look for the recording and the slides, which we will send out to you. Just give us a few days to edit just a little bit. And thank you so much. We hope to see you again really soon. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.